In the shadowy rainforest of Alaska's Kenai Peninsula, an entire village, Portlock, thrived off the sea despite relentless fog, unstable ground, and total isolation. Then, within a few short years, it vanished, leaving only rotting docks and rumours in its wake. Official records offer no clear reason, just abandoned cabins and legends of something lurking in the woods. What forced everyone from Portlock to disappear without a trace? Portlock sat pressed between the Gulf of Alaska and a wall of spruce forest, where the Kenai Peninsula's southern edge drops steeply into the sea. The bay itself was carved by ancient glaciers, leaving behind a jagged coastline and a basin filled with silt, clay, and decomposing moss. These thin, waterlogged soils never offered much support for heavy buildings or roads. Even the earliest NOAA shoreline maps show how the coast here is always shifting. Tides surge in and out, pulling at the land, while storms and runoff eat away at the edges. The climate is relentless. Rain falls most days of the year, and thick fog often settles in for weeks at a time, blurring the line between forest and water. Humidity stays high, and the air is always cool, even in summer. Winters bring heavy, wet snow that weighs down roofs and breaks branches, while freeze-thaw cycles work their way into every crack in wood and stone. The ground rarely dries out completely, so rot sets in fast. Timber pilings and cabin floors, even when newly built, start to sink and twist within a few seasons. Dense stands of Sitka spruce and alder crowd the hillsides, their roots gripping the unstable slopes. The forest floor is a tangle of moss, fallen logs, and tangled undergrowth, making travel on foot slow and risky. Every path quickly disappears beneath new growth if left untended. Wildlife is everywhere. Brown bears roam the riverbanks, moose crash through the brush, and packs of wolves move silently among the trees. For anyone living here, the presence of these animals is a daily reality, not just a distant threat. Access is always limited. With no roads connecting Portlock to the rest of Alaska, the only way in or out is by boat or, in rare cases, seaplane, both at the mercy of storms and tides. The bay's waters can turn violent without warning, and the coastline offers few safe harbours. Supplies, mail, and even news from the outside world arrive only when the weather allows. In this environment, isolation is not just a feeling, it's a fact of life. The land itself sets the rules, and every attempt to build or settle here must contend with forces far older and stronger than any human plan. By the early 1920s, a new kind of ambition took hold along the shore of Port Chatham Bay. Investors from Seattle and San Francisco eyed the region's salmon runs, and within a few years a cold storage plant was followed by the construction of a full-fledged cannery. The US Post Office opened in 1921, a small but telling sign that Portlock was now a permanent community. The cannery's bunkhouses and family cabins rose quickly, built from local spruce and fir, their roofs pitch steep to shed the endless rain. A dock stretched into the bay, battered by tides and storms but vital for every shipment that arrived or left. Population here swelled and shrank with the seasons. At the peak of summer, as many as 80 people lived and worked in Portlock, native Alaskans, Aleut Russian families, and workers from the lower 48. In winter, the number dropped to 30 or fewer. Pay was steady when the fish were running, but every resident depended on the cannery's fortunes. Payroll ledgers from the 1920s and 30s show names crossing in and out, with few staying more than a handful of years. Supplies arrived by boat from Homer or Seward, their timing always uncertain. Mail, groceries, and even news from the outside world could be delayed by weeks if the weather turned foul. The cannery's machinery, boilers, conveyors, and canning lines needed constant upkeep. Salt air rusted metal, while dampness warped floors and walls. Maintenance logs from the era note repeated repairs to the dock and bunkhouses, with workers often pulled away from fishing to patch roofs or shore up pilings. Any lapse in repairs risked a chain reaction. A broken boiler could stop production. A rotted dock could strand supply boats. Even with the post office and the school open, daily life was always one storm away from disruption. By the late 1930s, cracks began to show. Fish runs that once seemed endless grew thin. State records and cannery reports document a clear decline in salmon, blamed on overfishing and shifting ocean conditions. Larger canneries, now built closer to Alaska's growing road network, could process more fish and move product faster. Portlock's isolation, once a shield, became a liability. Payrolls shrank and families began to look elsewhere for steadier work and safer living. The cannery's future, and the village itself, grew uncertain as the first signs of economic downturn took hold. Stories of people vanishing into the forest began to circulate among Portlock's residents in the late 1930s. Hunters, prospectors, even seasoned loggers, men who knew the land, disappeared without a trace. When bodies were found, they were sometimes described as crushed or torn apart, their deaths blamed on something far more powerful than any bear. The Alutiiq word for this force is Nantainak, meaning the one that steals people. In oral histories, elders recount warnings passed down for generations: avoid the woods when the fog is thick, never travel alone, and always show respect for the land. An Alutiiq elder's voice, recorded in Sugtstun, tells of nights when the forest fell silent except for distant, unnatural roars. Tracks larger than any man's would appear along the riverbanks. Anthropologists studying these accounts note that Nantinak stories long predate the cannery, serving as both spiritual warning and a boundary marker, reminding listeners that some places are not meant for humans. As fear took hold, families armed themselves, children were kept indoors, and the once bustling village grew wary of its own backyard. The line between folklore and daily life blurred, leaving a community on edge, watching the forest for signs of what might come next. Official records confirm the end of Portlock through a single bureaucratic act: the closure of its post office in 1950. That notice, filed in the Federal Archives, is the last formal trace of the village as a living place. Afterward, the site emptied almost overnight. Boats left the harbour loaded with household goods, leaving behind cabins, machinery, and the silent cannery. No demolition crews arrived. The forest and tides began their slow work, erasing paths and swallowing wood and metal. Modern researchers, hoping for answers, have combed the site with GPS and drone surveys. These efforts reveal only the faintest outlines: a scatter of pilings, the suggestion of a grid where streets and buildings once stood. No forensic evidence of violence or mass grave has ever surfaced. Archaeological reports describe decay, not disaster: collapsed roofs, rusted boilers, and earthworks blurred by moss and alder. The official record ends with abandonment, and the physical evidence supports only a story of neglect, rapid evacuation, and the relentless return of wilderness. Any research or filming at the Portlock site requires written permission from the Nanwalek Native Corporation, who hold legal and cultural authority over the land. The corporation maintains a strict permit policy. No access is granted without a signed agreement, and all crews must pay an honorarium according to a set schedule. A local liaison, hired from the Nanwalek community, reviews every script, interview, and translation before publication. This process ensures that all Alutiiq language content is properly credited, with in-language names and phrases appearing on screen alongside English. On-screen citations are mandatory for every archival image, document, or oral history segment. Traditional songs or chants, if included, require separate negotiation and documented approval, with music licensing fees paid directly to the community. Before any release, a private screening is held for descendants and elders who retain the right to request edits or withhold sensitive material. These requirements are non-negotiable, reflecting a commitment to responsible storytelling and respect for both heritage and living community. In 1950, the Portlock Post Office closed its doors, marking the end of a community that had once numbered up to 80 residents. Archival records confirm that the village's decline followed years of economic hardship, failed infrastructure, and isolation, with official salmon cannery operations ceasing and no road or telegraph links ever established. Oral histories preserved by Alutiiq descendants recount unexplained disappearances and the Nantinak legend, but no contemporaneous law enforcement or coroner records document the alleged deaths. Modern surveys show the site reclaimed by forest, with only dock pilings and faint debris remaining. The reasons for Portlock's abandonment are documented: declining resources, environmental threats, and mounting fear, yet the full truth behind the stories of panic and loss remains unverified. Today, the land is protected by the Nanwalek Native Corporation, and access is limited to preserve both ecology and memory. Portlock stands as a factual case of how isolation, adversity, and cultural legacy can erase a settlement, leaving questions that official records have yet to fully answer.